Today on CityCast Chicago, the city preps for intensifying ICE raids. CTA leadership continues to sound the alarm, and where to celebrate Juneteenth early this weekend. It's Friday, June 13th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. I'm joined this morning by a duo from Block Club Chicago. We've got reporter Francia Garcia Hernandez in the building. Welcome back, my friend. How you feeling today?
I feel great. Thank you for having me, and thank you for rolling out those R's for my name.
Oh my God, I tried. I tried. Thank you so much for that. We've also got investigative reporter from Block Club Chicago, Manny Ramos in the building. Manny, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's good to be back with you guys and then seeing everyone virtually.
Hey, I appreciate y'all being in the building. It's far in between when we get to see each other, but I'm glad y'all make time for the podcast every now and then. If you are new to CityCast Chicago, welcome. We appreciate you being here. Feel free after this episode, if you got some time, to go dig through the crates. Not only are we making episodes every day, Monday through Friday, but we have been for over 4 years, something like that, maybe like 1,100 episodes. Yeah, I'm getting too far. My point is, welcome. We appreciate you being here. We got a great podcast episode, and by great, I mean at times it's going to be deeply frustrating. At times it may break your heart. My hopes at times it motivates you to invest more into your community, your neighborhood. And like with every episode, we're going to finish out with some good news. I just realized while I was doing the intro that today is Friday the 13th. First, I guess I got to ask, are y'all like into horror? Have y'all been thinking about this Friday the 13th come up? Do y'all like avoid ladders and look out for black cats? Like, do y'all have any relationship to Friday the 13th?
I personally don't, but I will avoid walking under a ladder any day of the year, so I'll keep doing that.
Yeah, same here. I have some superstitions like with avoiding ladders, breaking poles and things like that, but no horror in my bone. I do read horror books, but nothing like Friday the 13th.
But ain't gonna be no movie marathons or nothing
no,
today.
Not that for me.
Every single Friday, we like to bring in our friends to talk about some of the biggest stories happening in our city, happening in their world. And I don't think there's any other place than to talk about the intensifying ICE raids that have been happening in the city. And of course, the protests that have followed. Earlier this week, the mayor's chief of staff said that federal agents are planning to deploy in the city as they did in Los Angeles and as they will be doing in other major cities across the country. That means more riot gear, potentially more mini tanks in our city, agents moving around with chemical agents, hopping out on people, dropping their kids off at school, raiding workplaces. And we've seen the city of Chicago, like in so many cities, stand up against this. I saw, hundreds become thousands at Federal Plaza earlier this week. We've seen more protests across the city. Francia, you've been covering this very closely. What have you been seeing this week?
Definitely a lot of, as you mentioned, resistance and organizing, not to take away the fear and the uncertainty that many feel, knowing that there are potential ICE raids. Last week, we reported on the tensions in Pilsen, the detention of 2 people that was captured on video by organizers, and we followed that story later. It was at a carnitas restaurant in Pilsen that's very well known, and then around the corner from that at a home. It was 2 people who were detained, and that left a chilling effect in the block for what we know. And we spoke to neighbors and organizers who later canvassed and shared know your rights information. This is a warrant and this is what it looks like, and here's the rights you have to remain silent if you're detained. But that fear is very real. At the same time, we're seeing people organize and protest, people organize and show up to courts or detention centers, like we saw in the South Loop last week as well, when people showed up for check-ins on their monitoring program, and then they were detained. And that just triggered a big response from organizers across the city who showed up and tried to protest these detentions, and some of them try to block ICE bans. So we're seeing resistance, we're seeing organizing, at the same time, we're seeing that chilling effect, that fear, that uncertainty, and that questioning of due process of
Mhm.
people who are following, in this case, with when I'm talking about the monitoring program, people were following the process, right? People were in the immigration system. People showed up to a check-in because they're trying to follow the law. They might have pending cases and they're going there trying to comply, and then they're seeing themselves or their loved ones detained. So it's a very complicated situation where many people are asking questions about due process and whether this is lawful.
The mayor's office themselves did respond to this issue during a press briefing. Mayor Brandon Johnson, spoke with reporters about a list of issues, but as Francia was mentioning, like communities right now are scared. So it was pretty much a very somber meeting that Johnson held. Talking about citywide protests and events unfolding nationwide. It seemed to be a very scripted remarks in his opening statements. Stressing that people have the rights to protest and that it's protected, but that they're needed to keep the city moving. So, like, he stressed the fact that like protesters can't stop ambulances, for example, or barricade streets. So he was kind of playing a balancing role with that. But ultimately, he was firmly on the side of folks having the right to protest against the actions that are happening from the federal government, and basically calling President Donald Trump an authoritarian figure. He went on to call Trump a tyrant at times, saying that he was motivated by power and quote dismissing our democracy. I have here, but overall, Johnson, said that it was up to not only him but also Governor Pritzker as well as Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle to sort of have like a unified front for what potentially could be happening on Saturday, which are, as Francia mentioned, could be increased rates that are similar to what was going on in Los Angeles. And it comes at a time where mass protests are already bubbling, supposed to be happening on that day, too.
Mhm. When they talk about standing in a unified front, I know Governor Pritzker has talked out about the state sanctuary laws. Like what does that look like? They talk about, maybe not um having, police officers participate with ICE, but they still end up sort of standing, in opposition to protesters and can't really do anything by way of preventing these raids. So what does it mean for the governor and for the mayor and for the board president to stand together, to fight for these individuals?
I think it's unclear, in all honesty, right? Because we saw what's going on in Los Angeles, for example, LAPD, shooting rubber bullets at the press, but also protesters were getting hit,
Hmm.
as they sort of protected, you know, Waymo vehicles from being blown up, right, or set ablaze. What the CPD's role in all of this, I think, is the what it's always been in terms of protests, but what's different now, it feels, is the with the threat of National Guard or military officials being deployed to the city. I think folks are feeling a little uneasy on the complicity that CPD's role can be in establishing sort of like this military order within our cities.
Yeah, I think it's also unclear, and we saw earlier this week we saw three aldermen are calling on CPD and other city agencies to show more documents about this specific incident in the South Loop last week, where at least 10 people were detained, and CPD were there. We could see officers inside and outside the building and patrols, and I think that incident specifically called out some of the perhaps gray areas where, as you mentioned, CPD said they're there for public safety and to ensure that all those who were demonstrating were safe. Nevertheless, for many of those who were demonstrating, it felt like they were assisting with ICE carrying out an immigration enforcement operation. So it can be tricky from what we're seeing, and from what elected officials, city officials are seeing as well. I think they're calling in to this hearing specifically to look into that incident and then understand how and when CPD responds to these potential actions and what their role should be. But again, I think it's still something that is yet to be looked into. I don't know whether this will actually lead to something. So far, it's just a call to investigate. So we're still waiting to see what these means in the future, if anything.
Yeah. As this has been unfolding this week, I think one of the most chilling things that's been sitting with me is as the federal government increases these inhumane raids, like as they give them more authority to move in with more violence, with less due process, right? We've already seen people quickly, essentially kidnapped, right, and moved out of the state, with no trial, no hearing, moved out of the country. And then, people protest in the streets as they ratchet up the inhumanity, the violence, right? We protest more, then they militarize the streets. And so it feels that we're really being boxed in, and in some ways being played as we fight for people's humanity, because the outcome is the Trump administration still gets what it wants from authoritarian perspective, right? This playbook to slowly get, like we said, National Guard troops and more federal agents in our streets, as more and more people are being, pushed into the shadows, being disappeared, being picked up without due process. It feels like this sort of like the walls are closing in on cities like Chicago.
Yeah, and to your point, I think it's targeted, right? Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
these raids aren't happening in agriculturally rich Republican states, right? These are
Mm-hmm.
happening in left-leaning, often liberal cities where multiculturalism is often celebrated or fought to protect. And it really shows that like this is a fight that they want. They want to have this sort of cyclical nature where they have reason to like implement these policies where like it's okay that for some reason now that we have Marines inside of Los Angeles, right? And what does that mean when it comes to protecting civilians, right? When we talk about the police's actions or roles in that, and I think it's a gray area that not to be an alarmist, but it's worrisome. It's unprecedented. It feels like.
I appreciate that throughout this, Block Club Chicago has continued to provide people with resources, know your rights, the hotlines, the organizations you can support, places like the Resurrection Project, Illinois Coalition for Immigration and Refugee Rights, New Life Centers, Beyond Legal Aid. Continue to shop at immigrant-owned businesses. At times, these feel like little things, like, to maybe donate some money or donate some time or go out to a march. But I still think this solidarity has to be front of mind, right? Even it's not, even if it doesn't feel like it's optimism, right? It has to, this, like, still invest in the collective. I want people to encourage their friends and their loved ones to stay tapped into these resources that exist in and around the city, even as they remain under threat. Earlier this week, one of Mayor Johnson's major vacancies got a temporary hire. Dr. Macklin King was named the interim CPS CEO. The search for a permanent CEO continues. The same remains true in CTA. There were rumblings of a potential hire also coming out of the mayor's camp. Manny, what's the latest with the ongoing search for CTA's next head executive?
We don't know. So the city CEO, John Roberson, was the leading candidate, it seemed. There was a bunch of rumors and speculations that Johnson was trying to push him through to become the next CTA president, which is, the third largest transit system in the country. But it seems like he will be leaving the city to become the executive vice president of the Obama Presidential Center. Which is still under construction at the moment. He's a City Hall veteran who's led various agencies over the years, and it's a really good job. This comes as sort of CTA is at a crossroad in a lot of ways, where they're on the verge of devastating cuts if they don't get funding. They face a collective fiscal cliff of $770 million for 2026, which is them, Metra, and Pace combined. But there was movement to pass a bill a couple weeks ago to find funding for these agencies that move, millions of people a year. Unfortunately, that bill fell through, and now CTA, Metra, and Pace are trying to figure out how they're going to fund next year. But whether or not Johnson has someone in mind for the CTA position is still kind of unsure at the moment. They claim that a nationwide search has already been conducted, but nothing has yielded any kind of inkling of what kind of benefit that has been. Like, who is the person that's top of mind for this role?
Hmm.
So a lot of uncertainty around not only the CEO or the next president for the CTA who's going to lead the system, but also the future of the CTA itself is in limbo.
Hmm. Last week, the current president, Nora Learson, said that there will be no changes to CTA service through 2025. But right now, they say they're prepping for three possible futures. Sort of based on your reporting, is it likely that we'll get a special session, potentially more funding, or is CTA planning for worst possible outcome?
I believe lawmakers are motivated to get something done. They are really, but they want to do this with governance reform. They feel like these agencies have been mismanaged in large part over the several decades. With leadership running ruckshot and not really following requests from city officials, such as President Dorval Carter uh, choosing not to go to city council meetings when he's called upon. So there's a desire to not only get funding but also seek reform. The problem, though, comes from collar counties who feel like giving more money to this agency takes away money from McHenry County and all of these surrounding area counties. So the problem isn't necessarily with lawmakers in the Chicago area, but more so state lawmakers who feel like they're bailing out a system that's only going to benefit Chicagoans. And I think that's sort of like where the major problem lies here. Is are they going to be able to convince folks to come over onto the side of Chicago and Chicagoans and find funding for this? But it has to be done through governance reform at the same time.
I will say I appreciate that it's been made clear by Chicagoans, at least people in my in and outside of my bubble, that like this is broken outside of like legislative circles and like just city hall and city council and like Chicagoans are tapped in. They are aware that this, even if we not all tapped into the deep details of the fiscal cliff, they are aware that 40% service cuts are on the table, that bus lines can be decimated. It is without saying this would have drastic consequences for our city. This would continue to wreck underinvested communities. This would, you know, be terrible for working class Chicagoans. And so I hope that lawmakers get something done. And I hope that whoever is to be the full-time president, we're able to put this on some type of road to stability because right now shit is really about to go off the rails.
Yeah, we need it. I mean, they're talking about like 1 in 5 Chicagoans will lose access to some type of bus service. Yeah, it will make traveling to work, traveling to your doctor's appointment, traveling to the grocery store much more burdensome than it has been coming out of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Francia, your colleague covered one of the city's top long-term street festival producers, not only closing earlier this year, but now are finding themselves in a little bit of legal trouble. What's going on here?
Yes, so it's an interesting story about something that's very I would say an icon of Chicago summer festivals, street festivals, and one of these is Taste of Randolph. But the company behind it is Star Events, which or also organizes other festivals like Mayfest, Southport Art Fest, the Midsummer Fest. The company quietly closed in January, Melody Mercado reported, but then we found that they are being sued for their mismanagement of Taste of Randolph. So it's interesting. It's also, it comes at a time when I've heard many neighbors question who is behind street events and who benefits from them, aside obviously from those who participate or those who enjoy it, like ourselves. But it also brings some, chaos sometimes to streets and
Mm-hmm.
parking issues and noise, and it can be problematic for neighbors. But it's also interesting because we have seen different reports about, these companies, Star Events, telling customers that it would be shutting down earlier this year and kind of leaving them hanging for what they planned to be another year, another street festival with the same company. at least in this lawsuit, Star Events is being accused of financial mismanagement, among other things. Other neighborhood groups kind of looked and said, well, it appears we were okay, but we saw a list there of like 20 to 25 events that were planned or were on the roster for being planned by Star Events. So it really begs the question of when this company disappears, what happens next and how does that leave people hanging? Aside from, obviously the organizers, I think of all of those vendors who kind of count and rely on the income from street festivals, the promotion, the maybe it's access to new neighborhoods that they don't often have access to. So it also has an impact at the local level in those small vendors that we love and that the city, supports because it makes it so unique. But at the same time, they need these avenues to make money. And when these festivals are in limbo, we also have to think about what happens to those who rely on them.
If you are somebody who is a frequent Uber rider, you may have noticed earlier this year that your final bills were more expensive than you expected when you were riding in and out of downtown at certain parts of the day. Well, you was not tripping. Manny, catch us up on this story.
Basically, what was going on is that Uber was overcharging its rideshare riders nearly $1.8 million in city congestion fees between January and April. This was a big story that Block Club's Mac Lederman reported on that really shed light into Uber's practices that the company says was done by mistake, but only after Block Club inquired on the issue. Now, the company has said that they have fully paid every customer back. So if you were one of these people who were receiving these charges, you might have received a refund or a credit of some sort, I believe. A spokesperson for Uber apologized, saying it was an error. City Council did want some answers, so they brought someone in to basically take some questions. Essentially, Uber overcharged the city's $1.50 ride per ride to downtown, which occurs normally out between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. on the daily hours. But they were charging these fees outside of those hours. The company has said it's a technical problem, like I mentioned, and now the city, which Uber has given the money to as part of this fee, said it's fact-checking these payments and would also be working to refund Uber for the error as well.
I definitely had ridden in and out of downtown during this period, so I'm sure I was caught up in this as well. But again, if you are a frequent rider, not only look on your bill to see if you are getting these extra fees, because they will dibble and dabble those things in there, and you should be contesting those. Was there a sense of if these refunds were already paid out?
Uber says it has been. Yeah.
Okay.
So Uber's already out here saying that it's all done. And we're at the moment where the city is actually verifying all that before they give Uber back the money, basically.
Got it.
I mean, this is my last plea for folks. Public transit is cheaper and more accessible.
Before we get out of here, we end every single episode of CityCast Chicago with some good news. Francia, what is your good news today? It looked like we got some cute little critters somewhere in the city.
Oh yes, adorable Coyote puppies at Graceland Cemetery. It's Patrick Philbin's story. He shared that there are these adorable pups in the cemetery, which has caused the parents to be a little bit more aggressive and defensive of their kids. So at the moment, dogs are banned from the cemetery, and people are advised to stay away from the coyotes and just, in case someone encounters them, they might be a little bit more aggressive because they're protecting their litter, but people can still walk through the cemetery. It's good news, I think, because we see wildlife thriving in the city still, despite, we have lots of concrete, but we also have lots of green spaces, and we still see wildlife finding its way to continue to exist in our city. So I think that's great news. Sad news for those who walk their dog in the cemetery, but, it's an excuse to check out a different neighborhood park or area of the city and go there instead.
Shout out to Colin. Like, you will just go through y'all stories, and within days, he's like, here goes some coyote pups. Here go pretty much the front lines of a protest downtown Chicago. I'm gonna give you the entire range. Again, shout out to Block Club Chicago. We will drop links to all of the stories we talked about in today's episode, and I definitely want y'all to see those cute little pictures. Manny, over to you. What is your good news for us today?
I don't have any citywide news. I have some personal news that's
Come on,
good for
we want
me,
it.
man. So my daughter is in T-ball now, and she will be coming out in the Puerto Rican Festival Parade, and so that's pretty exciting. You know, I'm also doing coaching now, which is something I've never done on the team. So excited about that this weekend to see her walk in the parade and being involved with all of that stuff.
Oh my God! You mentioned the festival and parade up top. Buried the lead. Not the kiddo gonna be in it. Oh my
Yeah,
God! How excited are you for that, man? Come on, I know you
super
just were
excited.
talking about
Yeah.
it, but how exciting is that?
Yeah, I'm thrilled. She's thrilled about it too. So really, really looking forward to that.
There we go. There we go. That's so exciting. Again, we will drop links in the show notes to the festival, to the parade. We got y'all. I'm going to wrap us up here. The 5th annual Bronzeville Juneteenth community event is this Saturday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. There are going to be, I think, 30 vendors out there. It is free. But again, feel free to donate to organizers. There's going to be live music. There's going to be food out there. There's going to be things for kids to do, for families to do. There are going to be storytellers. There's going to be art that you can buy, also live art you can participate in. Juneteenth is next weekend, and the city is going to have more celebrations, more volunteer events, more like walks than I could possibly list. So make sure you are following along at chicago.citycast.fm, where we are trying to provide you with one of the best event calendars in the city. So make sure you bookmark that. I really want to thank our guest today from Block Club Chicago, Francia Garcia Hernandez. Thank you for making time for us over here at CityCast Chicago.
Thank you for having us. This was great. We covered a lot of ground.
Yes, we did. In 40 minutes or less. We try our best. We've also got Manny Ramos in the building. Thank you for making time, my friend.
It's always a pleasure seeing everyone and being on this podcast.
Before we get out of here, I want to give another shout out to all of the good folks from Block Club Chicago. They're celebrating 7 years, y'all, and the organization has been amazing partners throughout our 4 years doing this podcast and newsletter. Thank you to all of the reporters who come on week after week, episode after episode. We're going to drop a link to Block Club in our show notes, and if you got it like that, show them some extra love this week. Please join me in thanking all of the people who make CityCast Chicago possible. Our executive producer is Simone Alisea. Our producer is Michelle Navarro. Our Hey Chicago newsletter editor is Emmy Mack. Our social media manager is Rick Homuth. Our roving newsletter editor this week was Alana Nevins. Our music is from Sam Thousand, All the Kimonos, and Mark Greenberg from the Mayfair Workshop. If you enjoy the podcast and the newsletter, do me one favor, don't gatekeep. Share us with your friends and family. If you're thinking, Kobe, I already shared it with all my friends and family. I've been here for a while, Jack. Then I don't know. Use this good weather to go make some new friends so you can share it with them. All right? I'm going to be back bright and early on Monday. I'll talk to you soon. Peace. I wasn't trying to get like snippy with you or nothing. You know, I ain't mean nothing by it, but like, you know.